The woman buys a dying German Shepherd for $1. What happens? Next, leaves, everyone regretful. This one's about to die. Who'd be foolish enough to buy it? The scarred vendor sneered, shrugging as Hannah, a kind-eyed widow, approached the rusted cage. Inside, a German Shepherd lay fading, a handwritten sign declaring, "Sick dog, $1, no returns." As Hannah, heartbroken, handed over her dollar, a voice from the crowd jeered, "Are you crazy, lady? What are you going to do with a dog's corpse?" Hannah simply cradled the frail creature she named Freya, feeling its faint breath. To discover the incredible journey that followed this $1 act of compassion and what became of Freya, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and listen to the full, unforgettable story. The stench hit first, a suffocating wave of ammonia, stale feces, and something metallic like old blood. It clung to the damp, midnight air, making Corporal Schmidt's stomach churn. He adjusted the grip on his MP5, the beam of his flashlight cutting a nervous swathe through the oppressive darkness of the dilapidated barn. Beside him, Officer Richter breathed heavily, his own light dancing across rows of crude, stacked cages. A whimper, thin and desperate, sliced through the silence. Then another and another, a chorus of misery that seemed to seep from the very walls. Schmidt's light found the source. A pair of eyes, wide and vacant with terror, peering from between rusted bars. The dog, some kind of shepherd mix, was little more than a skeleton draped in matted fur. Its breathing was shallow, rattling. "Gott im Himmel!" Richter muttered, his voice tight. As they moved deeper, the full horror unfurled. Cage after cage held emaciated animals, some lying motionless, others feebly scratching at their confines. The floor was a slurry of mud and waste. In one corner, a pile of small, still bodies lay half covered by a tattered tarp, the flies already gathering. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked from the loft above. Both officers froze, lights snapping upwards. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness, resolving into the silhouette of a man, large and imposing. He held something long and metallic, a heavy wrench, glinting dully. "Polizei, show yourself." "Hands, where we can see them," Schmidt barked, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. The man didn't comply. Instead, a low growl rumbled from his chest, a sound more animal than human. He took a step forward, then another, the wrench swinging slightly by his side. Below, in the cages, the whimpering intensified, a soundtrack to the escalating dread. Schmidt could feel the sweat trickling down his back, his finger tightening on the trigger. The air crackled with imminent violence. The barn, a tinderbox of fear and cruelty, ready to ignite. What had they stumbled into? And who was this man, guarding this gallery of suffering with such silent menace? Hannah Richter, a woman whose 64 years had etched kindness into the lines around her eyes and silvered her once dark hair, knew loss intimately. Her small, meticulously kept cottage on the outskirts of Leipzig felt emptier these days. Max, her boisterous golden retriever, her companion, for 12 steadfast years, had succumbed to a swift illness 3 months prior. The silence he left behind was a palpable presence, a constant reminder of the joy that had been. Mornings were the hardest, the absence of his wet nose nudging her awake, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the kitchen floor. Hannah's world was one of routine and quiet contemplation. A retired librarian, her days were now filled with tending her small vegetable garden, volunteering at the local community center's soup kitchen twice a week, and long walks through the Auenwald, the sprawling floodplain forest that bordered her property. She was a creature of habit, finding solace in the familiar. Her late husband, Klaus, a pragmatic engineer, had always admired her gentle strength, a quiet resilience that had seen her through life's inevitable storms. Now, that strength was being tested by a profound loneliness Max's passing had unearthed. Leipzig, a city of vibrant history and culture, also had its shadowed corners. The sprawling open-air market on the city's western edge, a chaotic symphony of vendors hawking everything from antique furniture to cheap electronics, was one such place. It was a place Hannah usually avoided, its raucous energy a stark contrast to her preferred tranquility. But today, a small, persistent ache in her heart had led her there. She wasn't actively looking for another dog, not yet. The thought felt like a betrayal to Max's memory. Yet, the idea of another furry presence, another heartbeat in her quiet home, was a fragile seed of hope. Her relationship with her son, Thomas, a busy architect living in Berlin, was cordial but somewhat distant. They spoke weekly, their conversations usually revolving around his demanding career and her gentle inquiries about his well-being. He worried about her being alone, often suggesting she move closer to him, perhaps into a managed retirement community. Hannah always politely declined. Her roots were here, in this house filled with memories, in this city that held both joy and sorrow. The simmering tension in Hannah's life was this quiet battle against encroaching solitude. She wasn't unhappy, not truly, but a vital spark felt diminished. Her garden flourished, her volunteer work was fulfilling, yet the specific warmth of companionship Max had provided was irreplaceable. She missed the unquestioning affection, the simple comfort of his presence. The market, with its cacophony and press of bodies, was overwhelming. She saw a few vendors with puppies, yapping and tumbling in makeshift pens. They were cute, undeniably, but none resonated. They felt generic. As she navigated the crowded aisles, the smells of grilled bratwurst and cheap perfume mingling in the air, she felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the place for her. She was about to turn and leave when a particular stall, tucked away in a less trafficked corner, caught her eye. It wasn't the goods on display, a motley collection of rusted tools and chipped crockery, but a small, handwritten sign. Sick dog, $1. No returns. Curiosity, tinged with a familiar pang of empathy, pulled Hannah closer. Behind a stack of old tires, almost hidden from view, was a metal crate. Inside, curled into the tightest possible ball on the cold, bare metal, lay a German shepherd, or what was left of one. Its fur, a dull black and tan, was matted and patchy, revealing sharp hip bones and a painfully prominent rib cage. Its breathing was shallow, each inhale a visible effort. The dog didn't lift its head, didn't even twitch an ear at her approach. Only its eyes, clouded with a profound weariness and pain, flickered almost imperceptibly. They held no fight, no hope, only a dull acceptance of suffering. The vendor, a surly man with a heavily scarred face and a cigarette dangling from his lips, watched her with dismissive eyes. Waste of time, lady. She's nearly gone. Just trying to get a buck for the crate. Really? He gestured vaguely with his cigarette, picked her up by the roadside. Probably dumped. A small group of onlookers had gathered, their expressions ranging from pity to morbid curiosity. Shame, that. Beautiful dog once. Maybe, one woman murmured. Another man scoffed. Putting it out of its misery would be kinder. Who'd buy a dying dog? Hannah felt a knot tighten in her chest. It wasn't just pity. It was a deep, resonant sorrow. This creature, abandoned and fading, mirrored a sliver of the desolation she sometimes felt in her own quiet life. Max had been a gift, a vibrant life force. This dog was the antithesis, a life dwindling to its last embers, and in that moment, something shifted within Hannah. It wasn't a rational decision, not a thought-out plan. It was an impulse, pure and undeniable, a refusal to let this life extinguish unnoticed and unmourned. Ignoring the vendor's cynical gaze and the muttering of the crowd, Hannah opened her worn leather purse and extracted a single, crisp dollar bill. "I'll take her," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The vendor blinked, then shrugged, snatching the dollar. "Your funeral. No refunds, remember." Whispers followed Hannah as she carefully unlatched the crate. Crazy old woman. What's she going to do with a dead dog? She paid them no mind. Gently, carefully, she reached in. The dog flinched almost imperceptibly at her touch, a tremor running through its emaciated frame. Hannah spoke softly, murmuring words of comfort, her voice a low balm. With painstaking slowness, she eased the dog out of the crate. It was lighter than she expected, a fragile collection of bones. Its fur felt coarse and dirty beneath her fingers, cradling the dog against her coat. Hannah walked away from the market, oblivious to the stares. She could feel the faint, erratic beat of its heart against her own. She hadn't thought beyond this moment, hadn't considered the veterinary bills, the slim chance of survival, the emotional toll. Her initial goal was simple, almost primal, to offer this creature a warm, peaceful place to die, if nothing else. But as she walked, a new name whispered itself into her mind. Freya, a goddess of love, beauty, and also fate. Her first call upon reaching home was to Dr. Carl Schmidt, her longtime veterinarian and a friend since Klaus was alive. Carl arrived within the hour, his usually jovial face growing grim as he examined Freya on a soft blanket by the fireplace. "Hannah," he said gently, his voice laced with professional concern. "This is very bad. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, multiple infected pressure sores, possible internal injuries from abuse. Judging by these old bruises, honestly, her chances are minimal. We can make her comfortable." But Hannah met his gaze, her own eyes pleading. "Please, Carl, whatever it takes. We have to try." The initial desire to simply provide a peaceful end had already morphed into a fierce determination to fight for this fragile life. Freya, nestled by the warmth, hadn't moved, but Hannah swore she felt the faintest sigh escape her lips. The next few days were a blur of meticulous care. Hannah, guided by Carl's instructions, administered subcutaneous fluids, gently cleaned Freya's sores, and offered tiny morsels of a special recovery diet, which the dog mostly ignored. She slept on a cot beside Freya, waking every few hours to check her breathing, to whisper encouragement. Carl visited daily, his expression remaining guarded, though he commended Hannah's unwavering dedication. "If love alone could heal, she'd be running by now," he remarked, a touch of sadness in his voice. Slowly, miraculously, Freya began to respond. On the third day, her tail gave the faintest of thumps when Hannah spoke to her. By the end of the week, she was taking small sips of water on her own and managing to keep down a few spoonfuls of food. Her eyes, though still dull, started to focus, following Hannah's movements around the room. A spark, tiny but tenacious, was rekindling. One cool morning, about 2 weeks into Freya's recovery, Hannah was preparing Freya's meager breakfast. The dog, now able to stand on wobbly legs for brief periods, let out a soft whine, nudging Hannah's hand with her nose and then looking pointedly toward the back door. Confused but intrigued, Hannah helped the weak dog outside into the small, fenced garden. Freya, with surprising determination for her frail state, limped towards a disturbed patch of earth beneath an old lilac bush, a spot Hannah rarely tended. She sniffed intently, then began to paw weakly at the loose soil, whining again, a sound filled with a strange urgency. Puzzled, Hannah fetched a small trowel. As she dug, the trowel struck something soft. Brushing away the earth, she uncovered a corner of what looked like a dirty burlap sack. A sickening odor, faint but unmistakable, rose from the soil. With a growing sense of dread, Hannah carefully excavated further. The sack contained the small, decomposing bodies of 3 newborn puppies, their fur the same black and tan as Freya's. Beside them lay a crudely made leather collar, too small for Freya, with a tarnished metal tag. Hannah picked it up, her hands trembling. Engraved on the tag were 2 words, Hundezucht Schatten. A cold fury washed over Hannah. Hundezucht Schatten, shadow kennel. She'd heard whispers, rumors in the community about a disreputable breeder on the outskirts of Leipzig, one known for cutting corners, for prioritizing profit over animal welfare. But this was monstrous. Freya, it seemed, wasn't just a roadside stray. She was a victim, a mother who had lost her young, likely due to the kennel's negligence or cruelty. Had Freya escaped, or been dumped after her puppies died, or were taken. The dog now looked at Hannah, a low, mournful sound emanating from her chest, as if confirming Hannah's horrifying realization. "Oh, Freya," Hannah whispered, her voice choked with emotion, pulling the dog into a gentle embrace. "You poor, brave girl. You tried to tell me." This discovery galvanized Hannah. Her initial mission to save Freya broadened. This wasn't just about one dog anymore. It was about the systemic cruelty that had brought Freya to death's door and killed her offspring. She thought of Max, of the joy he'd brought, and the stark contrast to the suffering Freya had endured. She couldn't stay silent. Remembering a series of articles about local corruption she'd admired, Hannah found the byline. Greta Schilling, an investigative journalist known for her tenacity. With trembling fingers, Hannah dialed the newspaper. Getting through to Greta directly took some persistence, but Hannah, fueled by a righteous anger, was not easily deterred. She explained Freya's story, the discovery in her garden, the name on the collar. Greta listened intently, her initial professional skepticism slowly giving way to intrigued concern. "Hundezuchtschatten," Greta repeated. "I've heard some rumblings about that place. Nothing concrete enough to build a story on, but your account. This is different. Physical evidence is compelling." She paused. "Mrs. Richter, this could be dangerous. People involved in these kinds of operations don't take kindly to scrutiny." "I understand," Hannah said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "But we can't let them get away with it. Freya deserves justice. Those puppies deserve justice." Greta agreed to meet. Their initial investigation was cautious. Greta used her contacts to do some preliminary digging into Hundezuchtschatten, checking for permits, any official complaints, and ownership records. It was registered to a man named Fritz Bauer, who had a minor record for public order offenses but nothing animal-related. Hannah, meanwhile, focused on Freya, whose recovery continued, albeit slowly. The dog was still deeply traumatized, flinching at loud noises and sudden movements, but a bond of trust was forming between her and Hannah. One afternoon, Greta suggested they do a discreet drive-by of the address listed for Hundezuchtschatten. It was a remote property, set back from a quiet country lane, surrounded by a high, dilapidated wooden fence. From the road, little could be seen, but they could hear it, the unmistakable chorus of many dogs barking, a discordant sound that carried an edge of desperation. A shiver ran down Hannah's spine. As they were about to drive away, a battered van, its sides emblazoned with a faded logo that might once have depicted a proud shepherd, turned into the driveway. The driver, a hulking man with a grim face, shot them a suspicious glare as he passed. It was the same scarred man Hannah had bought Freya from at the market. The pieces were starting to connect, painting an increasingly ugly picture. The drive-by confirmed their fears. Hundezuchtschatten was not a place of happy, well-cared-for animals. The distant chorus of barks had sounded less like playful exuberance and more like a symphony of neglect. Greta, utilizing her journalistic acumen, began a deeper dive. She discovered that Fritz Bauer had a history of failed businesses and was rumored to have connections to underground dog-fighting circles, though no charges had ever stuck. The kennel itself operated in a gray area of the law, exploiting loopholes in animal welfare regulations that were poorly enforced for commercial breeding establishments, especially those in rural, less visible locations. Hannah, meanwhile, found her quiet life irrevocably altered. Her walks with Freya, who was now strong enough for short excursions in the Auenwald, were no longer just for quiet contemplation. She found herself observing other dog owners, wondering about the origins of their pets, a new layer of awareness coloring her perception of the world. Freya, too, seemed to be watching. Her ears pricked at the sound of distant barks, a low growl sometimes rumbling in her chest when unfamiliar vans passed their house. The turning point came unexpectedly. Greta managed to contact a former employee of Hundezucht Schatten, a young man named Lucas, who had quit in disgust after only a few months. He was initially terrified to speak, fearing retribution from Bauer, but Greta, with her calm persistence and guarantee of anonymity, convinced him. They met Lucas in a quiet cafe on the other side of Leipzig. He was nervous, his hand shaking as he recounted his experiences. He described cramped, unsanitary cages, dogs regularly deprived of adequate food and water, and a complete lack of veterinary care. They called it cost-saving, Lucas said, his voice bitter. Sick dogs weren't treated. They were left to die or disposed of. Puppies that didn't meet their standards, size, markings, whatever, were considered defects. Then came the bombshell. Bauer wasn't just breeding, Lucas continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He was supplying, sometimes, dogs that weren't selling or older breeding stock that was spent. They'd vanish. There were whispers about fighting rings and the puppies. He had a particularly cruel way of dealing with the ones he couldn't sell or that got sick. He'd take them to the flea market, sell them cheap to anyone just to recoup a few euros. If they didn't sell by the end of the day, Lucas trailed off, his face pale. He'd say it was cheaper than a vet bill to just bury them. Hannah felt a wave of nausea. Freya, her puppies. It all clicked into a horrifyingly clear picture. The man at the market, Bauer, wasn't just a callous opportunist. He was a systematic abuser, running an operation built on suffering. Greta pressed Lucas for more. Did you ever see where he buried them? Lucas nodded slowly. There was a spot behind the main barn, near an old, rusted-out tractor. He called it the boneyard. This was it. The vague suspicions and disturbing anecdotes had coalesced into a concrete, actionable horror. Greta knew that if they could find this boneyard and get photographic or video evidence of the conditions inside the kennel, they would have an undeniable case to take to the authorities, one that couldn't be brushed aside. Hannah looked at Greta, her gentle eyes now hardened with a resolve that surprised even herself. The initial goal of simply exposing cruelty had transformed. This was no longer just about Freya's past. It was about dismantling Hundezucht Schatten entirely, about stopping Fritz Bauer before he could inflict more suffering. "We have to get in there," Hannah said, her voice low but steady. "We need proof that no one can ignore." Greta nodded, a grim determination on her face. "It's incredibly risky, Hannah. If we're caught trespassing, Bauer could react violently. But you're right. Lucas's testimony is powerful, but visual evidence from the site itself, especially of this boneyard, that would be damning." The decision hung in the air. This was the point of no return. They were no longer just concerned citizens. They were actively moving against a dangerous man and a criminal enterprise. Hannah thought of Freya, sleeping peacefully at home, her scars slowly healing, her trust tentatively given. She thought of the tiny bodies in her garden. There was no going back to her quiet, ordinary life, not until this was confronted. The stakes had been irrevocably raised. They were no longer just reacting to Freya's plight. They were proactively seeking to dismantle the source of such cruelty. The revelation from Lucas and their subsequent decision to gather direct evidence plunged Hannah and Greta into a world of clandestine planning and mounting anxiety. Hannah, a woman who once found navigating the self-checkout at the supermarket a minor stressor, now found herself discussing surveillance tactics and contingency plans with Greta. The journalist, for her part, was accustomed to risk, but the personal involvement of Hannah and the clear danger posed by Bauer weighed heavily on her. Greta began by meticulously researching the layout of Hundezucht-Schatten, using publicly available satellite imagery and Lucas's detailed descriptions. They identified potential blind spots in the fencing, access routes, and the likely location of the boneyard behind the main barn. The plan was for Greta, equipped with a high-quality camera with a telephoto lens and a small, discreet audio recorder, to attempt to gain visual evidence from the periphery, or if a secure opportunity arose, to briefly enter the grounds. Hannah's role would be to act as lookout from a concealed position on the public road, ready to call for help or create a diversion if necessary. Their first few attempts were abortive. Bauer, or his thuggish associate, the scarred man from the market, whom Lucas identified as Marco, Bauer's enforcer, seemed to be ever present. The property was more active than they had anticipated, with vans coming and going at odd hours. Each aborted attempt frayed Hannah's nerves further, but also solidified her resolve. Freya, sensing Hannah's distress, would often rest her head on Hannah's lap in the evenings, a silent offering of comfort that only strengthened Hannah's determination. One evening, after another fruitless surveillance attempt, Hannah returned home to find her back gate slightly ajar. Nothing seemed obviously out of place inside, but a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Had Bauer or Marco somehow tracked her? Was this a warning? She meticulously checked the locks, her heart pounding. Freya, unusually agitated, paced the kitchen, a low growl rumbling in her chest as she sniffed at the back door. Hannah reported it to Greta, who advised increased caution. "They might not know exactly who we are yet," Greta said, "but if Bauer suspected anyone was snooping after Lucas talked, he might be sending a general message to stay away." The incident, though unnerving, spurred them to modify their plan. They needed to be smarter, less predictable. Greta decided to invest in a small, motion-activated trail camera, the kind used by wildlife photographers. The new plan was for her to try and place it discreetly near the suspected boneyard during a pre-dawn foray, when activity at the kennel was likely to be at its lowest. Meanwhile, Freya's recovery progressed. She was still wary of strangers, especially men who resembled Bauer or Marco in build or demeanor. But with Hannah, she was increasingly affectionate and playful. Her coat was growing back thick and glossy, and she had gained healthy weight. Her presence was a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. Hannah began taking Freya on longer walks, not just in the Auenwald, but also on different routes around her neighborhood, partly to rebuild Freya's confidence and partly to vary her own routine, making her movements harder to track if anyone was watching. Greta also began to subtly reach out to a trusted contact within the local police force, Detective Schuster, a man known for his integrity but also for being cautious and by the book. She didn't reveal the full extent of their investigation, merely inquired about any official complaints or concerns regarding Hundezucht Schatten. Schuster confirmed there had been rumors and anonymous tips over the years, but never enough solid evidence to warrant a major investigation, especially given Bauer's knack for staying just within the murky legal boundaries of kennel operations. He warned Greta to be careful, acknowledging that Bauer was not a pleasant individual. The near miss with the open gate had shaken Hannah, but it also stripped away any remaining naivety. She installed an extra deadbolt on her doors and a simple motion sensor light in her backyard. Her small cottage, once a haven of peace, now felt like a fragile fortress. She found herself jumpier, more aware of sounds in the night. The fight against Hundezucht Schatten was no longer an abstract crusade for justice. It had become deeply personal, a direct threat to her own safety and Freya's. The weight of it all began to show. Hannah was losing sleep. Her appetite diminished. Thomas, during their weekly calls, noticed the strain in her voice. "Mom, are you all right? You sound tired. Maybe you should reconsider coming to Berlin for a bit." Hannah deflected his concerns, not wanting to worry him, but his words echoed her own internal fears. Was she in over her head? But then she would look at Freya, now confidently trotting beside her, her tail giving a tentative wag, her eyes, once so dull, now bright with a burgeoning trust and affection. This dog, who had been discarded as worthless, was a testament to resilience, and Hannah knew she couldn't give up. She had to see this through, not just for Freya, but for all the other nameless, voiceless victims of Hundezucht Schatten. Their new strategy, focusing on acquiring undeniable proof with the trail camera, felt riskier, but also more targeted. It was a proactive step, born from the realization that waiting for Bauer to make a mistake wasn't enough. They had to force his hand by exposing the truth. The pre-dawn air was cold and damp as Greta, dressed in dark clothing, slipped through a small gap in the dilapidated fence of Hundezucht Schatten. Hannah waited a quarter-mile down the road, engine off, phone clutched in her hand, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car sent a jolt of anxiety through her. Freya, beside her, on the passenger seat seemed to pick up on her tension, whining softly and nudging Hannah's hand with her nose. Greta moved with practiced stealth, navigating by the faint glow of her phone screen, which displayed the satellite map and Lucas's sketch of the property. The chorus of barks was more subdued at this hour, but still present, a constant, miserable undertone. She located the rusted tractor Lucas had described, and behind it, a patch of ground that looked frequently disturbed. The metallic, sickeningly sweet smell of decomposition, though faint, was undeniable. This was the place. Working quickly, her fingers numb with cold and adrenaline, Greta secured the small trail camera to a sturdy tree branch, angling it towards the suspected burial site. She camouflaged it with a few dead leaves and twigs, then retreated as silently as she had come. Back in the car, relief washed over Hannah as Greta slid into the driver's seat, pale but triumphant. "It's done," Greta whispered. Now we wait. The waiting was agonizing. They retrieved the camera after 3 days, choosing another pre-dawn window. Back at Hannah's cottage, they huddled over Greta's laptop, Freya lying at their feet. The initial images were mundane. A stray cat, a raccoon, swaying branches. Then a figure appeared, Marco, dragging a heavy burlap sack towards the boneyard. The camera clicked, capturing him digging a shallow hole and unceremoniously dumping the sack's contents, small, limp forms, before covering them over. Another sequence showed Bauer himself roughly handling a visibly sick adult dog, kicking it when it stumbled, then leading it towards a dilapidated outbuilding not mentioned by Lucas. The images were horrifying, gut-wrenching, but they were the undeniable proof they needed. Greta immediately contacted Detective Schuster. "I have something you need to see," she said, her voice tight with controlled outrage. "Something that will leave no doubt about what's happening at Hundezucht Schatten." Schuster, upon viewing the footage and hearing Lucas's now willing to be named testimony, was visibly shaken. The bureaucratic inertia he usually faced seemed to evaporate. He promised swift action, initiating the process for a search warrant. However, Bauer was not idle. Perhaps he'd noticed the subtly disturbed ground near the boneyard, or perhaps his paranoia was simply heightened. 2 days after Greta retrieved the camera, and just as Schuster was finalizing the warrant, Hannah was walking Freya in the Auenwald. It was late afternoon, the light beginning to fade. As they rounded a bend on a secluded path, a figure stepped out from behind a thicket of trees. It was Fritz Bauer. He wasn't wearing his usual work clothes. He looked almost presentable, which somehow made him more menacing. "Mrs. Richter, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth, but with an underlying edge of steel. "Enjoying your walk with the miracle dog?" Hannah froze, her hand instinctively tightening on Freya's leash. Freya, sensing the threat, let out a low, rumbling growl, planting herself firmly in front of Hannah, her hackles slightly raised. "I don't know what you mean," Hannah said, trying to keep her voice even. Bauer chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, I think you do. You and your reporter friend have been very curious lately." Bad for business, that kind of curiosity. Bad for nosy old women, too. He took a step closer. Some dogs are better off forgotten. Some secrets are better left buried. His eyes flicked towards Freya. That one, he sneered, should have stayed gone. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Hannah, but with it came a surge of protective fury. "You won't touch her," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "And you won't get away with what you've done." Bauer's eyes narrowed. "Brave words, but this is my town, old woman. People know better than to cross me." He took another step, and Freya barked a sharp, warning sound. For a moment, Bauer hesitated, perhaps surprised by the dog's defensiveness. He glanced around, as if suddenly aware they weren't entirely alone on the public path. "This isn't over," he hissed, then turned abruptly and strode away, disappearing back into the trees. Hannah stood shaking, her knees weak. Freya licked her hand, whining anxiously. The encounter was a clear threat, an escalation. Bauer knew. He knew they were on to him. The race against time had just become infinitely more dangerous. She immediately called Greta, then Detective Schuster. The warrant, Schuster assured them, was hours away from being signed. "Stay home, Hannah. Lock your doors. We're moving as fast as we can." That night, Hannah barely slept. Every creak of the old cottage, every rustle of wind sounded like Bauer returning. Freya stayed close, a warm, reassuring presence in the darkness. The final confrontation was no longer an abstract possibility. It felt terrifyingly imminent. The evidence was gathered, the authorities alerted, but Bauer was cornered, and a cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. The sharp, insistent rapping on the door came just before dawn. Hannah's heart leaped into her throat, but then she heard Detective Schuster's voice. "Mrs. Richter, it's the police. We have the warrant. We're going in." Relief, immense and overwhelming, washed over her. Through the window, she saw several police vans and an animal control vehicle parked discreetly down the street. Officers moving with quiet efficiency. Schuster, accompanied by Greta, who had her press pass clearly visible, stood on her doorstep. "We'd like you to stay here, Mrs. Richter," Schuster said. "It could be dangerous." Hannah nodded, though every fiber of her being wanted to witness Bauer's downfall. Freya, sensing the tension and the presence of multiple strangers, stood by Hannah, alert but not aggressive. The raid on Hundezucht Schatten was swift and decisive. Officers breached the perimeter fence, fanning out across the property. The sounds of shouting, barking, and banging doors carried faintly to Hannah's cottage. Marco was apprehended, trying to flee through a back field. Bauer, however, had barricaded himself inside the main barn, the one where Lucas had described the worst of the conditions. A tense standoff ensued. Schuster, using a megaphone, ordered Bauer to surrender. For a long while, there was no response, only the frantic barking of the dogs trapped inside. Then, a single defiant shout from Bauer. "You'll take nothing from me." Suddenly, smoke began to billow from the barn's eaves. He set it on fire, an officer yelled. The situation escalated dramatically. Firefighters, already on standby, rushed forward. Amidst the chaos, several officers managed to force open a side door of the barn, not for Bauer, but for the animals. A cacophony of desperate barks and whimpers erupted as terrified, emaciated dogs, many of them puppies, stumbled out into the hazy morning light, blinking against the unexpected brightness. Animal control officers and volunteers gently guided them towards waiting carriers. Bauer, finally driven out by the encroaching flames and choking smoke, emerged coughing, his face blackened, his eyes wild with fury and defeat. He lunged at a nearby officer, but was quickly subdued and handcuffed. As he was led away, his malevolent gaze swept over the scene, the rescued dogs, the emergency crews, Greta documenting everything with her camera, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes met Hannah's, who had stepped out onto her porch. There was no remorse in his expression, only a raw, impotent rage. Freya, standing beside Hannah, let out a single, deep bark, as if a final pronouncement on her former tormentor. The aftermath of the raid on Hundezucht-Schatten sent ripples through Leipzig. Greta Schilling's exposé, complete with the harrowing footage from the trail camera and pictures of the rescued animals, dominated the front page of the local newspaper and was picked up by national outlets. The sheer scale of the cruelty, hidden for so long in plain sight, shocked the community. Fritz Bauer and Marco faced a litany of charges, including animal cruelty, illegal breeding practices, and resisting arrest. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Greta and corroborated by Lucas's testimony and the grim findings at the boneyard, was overwhelming. Over 70 dogs and puppies were rescued from the kennel. Many were in critical condition, requiring immediate and intensive veterinary care. Local animal shelters and rescue organizations, bolstered by an outpouring of public donations and volunteer support spurred by the news coverage, scrambled to provide for them. The road to recovery for these animals would be long, but they were finally safe. Hannah found herself an unintentional local hero. Initially uncomfortable with the attention, she slowly came to accept her role as the catalyst for change. People who had once pitied the crazy old woman who bought a dying dog now looked at her with respect. Some even sent letters of apology for their earlier judgments at the market, though Hannah held no grudges, understanding that apathy was often born of ignorance. Her small cottage became a temporary hub for updates on Freya, who was now a minor celebrity herself, the miracle dog of Leipzig. Freya thrived in the peace and love of Hannah's home. The trauma of her past never fully vanished. A sudden loud noise could still make her flinch, and she remained wary of certain types of men. But she blossomed into a confident, affectionate companion. Her fur grew thick and lustrous, her eyes bright and intelligent. She loved her walks in the Auenwald, chasing squirrels and sniffing every new scent with an enthusiasm that warmed Hannah's heart. She was no longer just a survivor, she was a symbol of hope and resilience. The legal process against Bauer and Marco was slow but steady. Thanks to the undeniable evidence and public pressure, the prosecution pursued the case vigorously. Ultimately, Both men received significant prison sentences and were banned from owning or working with animals for life. Hundezuchtschatten was permanently shut down, its dark legacy finally over. Hannah never sought another dog after Max with the intention of replacing him. Freya had come into her life by chance, a fragile life she had fought for. In saving Freya, Hannah had also, in a way, saved herself from the quiet loneliness that had begun to encroach. Her world was no longer just routine and quiet contemplation. It was filled with purpose, with the happy thumps of Freya's tail, and with the knowledge that one small act of compassion could ignite a powerful wave of change. Each evening, as Hannah sat by the fireplace, Freya resting her head on her lap, she would stroke the dog's soft fur and whisper, "You were worth it all, my brave girl." The shadows of the past had been chased away, replaced by the warm glow of a hard-won peace.